Psychology. This work being undertaken is psychological, consisting of making a number of specifically defined psychological efforts designed for a particular end. Everyone has a psychology, as well as a body. The object of the work therefore is to lift an individual off the psychological basis they rest upon. Everyone admits they possess a body, which may be in a better or worse condition. Our body is an object of the senses, and as you know we are all inclined to take only what the senses show us as real. However, everyone also has a psychology. These people do not so easily admit, for they cannot see or touch their own, or another person's psychology via the outer senses. Furthermore, a person is usually particularly unwilling to admit that they themselves have a definite kind of psychology. A definite kind of body, yes. A psychology, no. They will agree that their body may be in a wrong state, but not their psychology. One result of this is that it not infrequently occurs that a person in the work does not know where or in what direction to make any effort. If the work consisted of a number of physical exercises, everyone would know where and in what direction effort had to be made, and if anyone did an exercise wrongly, they would be seen doing it wrongly and therefore corrected. A person would then know how they were progressing by the number of physical exercises they could perform correctly, and they could also feel the satisfaction of being able to do more than others could do, and so on. As is known, there are schools of teaching that deal only with the body. Sport is one such example, as are many martial arts. They are the schools belonging to the first way, the way of man number 1. The control of the body by the development of will over the body is the objective. The fakir who sits with outstretched arms for years and years is another example. He develops will over the body. But by itself this is useless. In some cases he may be taken into a school of another kind and his arms broken down, if possible, then be given teaching to develop him psychologically. He has will over the body, but no understanding, and a will without understanding is useless, perhaps even worse than useless. Such an individual, quite ignorant and stupid, may crystallize out, by their incredible efforts, that is nothing can be altered in them, hence they will remain permanently ignorant and stupid, whether they are taken into another school or not. But such examples show us one thing. They show us the extent of effort on oneself that is possible among Eastern people, which may help to understand why esoteric teaching has always come from the East. This teaching that we are beginning to try to understand does not belong to the first way, the way of the fakir, nor to the second way, which is the way of the monk, the emotional path. Nor to the third or yogi way, the way of the intellectual or scholar. It is called the fourth way, and we can note here that one of its general objectives is to unite the wisdom of the East with the science of the West. Its individual starting point is psychological, not physical, and as mentioned, its purpose is to lift a person off the psychological basis they rest upon. That is, to change a person, not physically, but psychologically. The effort that it demands in personal work are not primarily physical, although these arise in their place, but psychological efforts, the first of which is self-observation. To observe oneself is a psychological effort, and it is only through self-observation that one becomes aware that we have a psychology. We all know that this is not an easy effort to make. It is far more difficult than making a physical effort, such as doing some exercises or cleaning pots and pans, mixing concrete, or working a keyboard, indeed doing anything connected with the outer visible world which lies in space, and to which we must first make a relationship. Remember that each of us lives in two worlds, one outer and visible, lying in space, and the other inner and invisible, not lying in space. Our bodies are in space, but not our psychology. Distinct from animals, we are so made that we can look out into the visible world in space where our bodies are standing, then inwardly into the invisible world, where our psychology is present. Just as we are always somewhere in the outer world, so too we are always somewhere in our inner world. The idea in the work is that just as we can change our position in the outer world through physical effort, so too can we change our position in the inner world through psychological effort. Just as a person can be in a better or worse place in the outer world, so they can be in a better or worse place in the inner world. Because it is difficult to look into the inner world and see where one is standing, because people let themselves be anywhere inside, although they would not think for a moment of letting themselves be anywhere outside. Let's therefore try to conceive what it means that each of us has a psychology, which is necessary to observe. Our psychology is, from one point of view, where we are, and what we frequent in this inner world. Just as we live somewhere and tend to frequent certain places in the outer world, so we live in and tend to frequent certain places in our inner world. The difference is that in this inner world we are not dealing with places in space, but with psychological states. Then just as it is your body that brings you into contact with a physical place, so it is your psychology that brings you into contact with a psychological state. At any moment you are somewhere physically and somewhere psychologically. Outer observation shows you where you are physically, inner observation, that is self-observation, shows you where you are psychologically. To be in a bad state psychologically is as if we might be in a dark corner of a room, sitting there morose and gloomy, when we might shift our position easily and stand in the light. The practice of self-observation in this work is to make us aware of where we are psychologically at any moment, then eventually to shift our position. It leads to self-awareness, which belongs to the third state of consciousness, the state where help can reach us. Where we are psychologically at any moment is what we are in that moment, unless we are aware of it, and separate internally from it. If we identify with all our inner states, with our negative emotions and dreary thoughts, as people do in life if they are quite asleep, then where we are psychologically will be what we are in that moment. We will be our state at that time. Self-observation is not a monotonous exercise that one is supposed to perform because told to do so. It is an act of practical intelligence. It is just as practically intelligent as to notice where you are driving a car to. If you never observe anything in yourself, not only will you never avoid anything in yourself, and so repeat your life day by day, always running into the same states, but you will think that your inner states are normal and natural, the only ones possible, and take them for granted. You will only expect life to change, not yourself. In this way, you will not be willing to think you have a psychology at all in any sense of the word, though you will admit that you have a body, which has its own peculiarities. You know what this work teaches about life? How it happens. What a dark spot in the universe we live in. Yet we all think what is happening to us right now is exceptional. Nothing is more useful or more interesting than to pull yourself up suddenly and notice where you are inside, where you are going. If you do this, you will begin to see what sort of psychology that you have, and what tendencies belong to it, what it keeps on connecting you with. You will begin to notice what you are always up to, inside, out of sight. When you can see all of this, not as yourself, not as I or me, but as your psychology, you can begin to separate from it and so change it. However, if you cannot admit that you have a psychology at all, and say I to every state it leads you into, then you can get nowhere. Let's now change the point of view a little by imagining a conversation in the following terms. Let us suppose someone in the work says to you, I find it difficult to observe myself, and I cannot quite see in what sense I have a psychology. You say to them, well, you dislike John Doe, don't you? They reply, yes, of course I do. He is very unfair. You say, but some people like him. They reply, I can't help that. I dislike him. You say, well, that is a part of your psychology, you know something to do with your mechanical dislikes. They reply, I cannot agree with you. I dislike John Doe and that's the end of the matter. It has nothing to do with my psychology. It is a fact. You say, well, to speak frankly, some people think you are also unfair. They reply, but that is absurd. If there is anything I can be perfectly certain of it is that I am always fair. And I always have been. You say, perhaps there is, all the same, something to observe here. They reply, I don't see what there is to observe. It is all as clear as daylight to me. And I think you are very unfair to suggest that I am unfair. In fact, to tell you the truth, I think you are very often unfair. You say, I am not unfair. It is the last thing I ever am or wish to be. In fact, People often say how fair I am. I can see that you do not understand me. They reply, and I can see that you do not understand me. At this point we had better terminate this imaginary conversation. Do you believe there is no psychology here? Both the imaginary individuals are becoming indignant, and neither of them apparently sees that any personal psychology enters into the situation that has arisen between them, and caused it. Neither of them observes they have a cherished picture of themselves as being fair. Neither of them sees that they are speaking from false personality, neither of them sees how they are lying. Notice one thing at this point: when we know a thing is true about ourselves, and acknowledge it internally, accusation can never make us indignant. It can make us sad perhaps. Indignation is mainly derived from false personality, imaginary I, and pictures of oneself. Being indignant about oneself is what is referred to here, and how people treat us, what they say to us. It comes from ascribing to ourselves what we have not got, of imagining ourselves to be what we actually are not. In this regard, the fact that we are so sensitive to criticism or censure of any kind is perhaps clear evidence that we have a psychology, apart from merely having a physical body. This invisible psychology of ours is more real to us, and a greater source of suffering than our visible bodies, save when the latter suffers considerable pain. Let's now trace a few results of this typical conversation we have imagined. Both individuals involved are indignant at being called unfair. They have in fact reacted just as we would ourselves. We are supposing them to be in the work and that both are now negative. What will now happen psychologically? They will both begin to justify themselves. One of the specific efforts we are taught to make in our personal work is the effort against self-justifying. Self-justifying is a complicated and very interesting process of inner and outer lying, whereby we put ourselves in the right. It belongs to our psychological level, to our level of being, and it is one of the things that keep us at that level. Negative emotions, self-justifying, identifying, and all the central things taught in this work in connection with practical effort on oneself, are the very things that keep us where we are. They keep us on the psychological basis we rest upon, preventing any change, any evolution of ourselves. This is why they are specially mentioned, and defined as things to be struggled and fought against. We must not think it wrong to self-justify, simply because the work says so. It is not wrong in a moral sense, but of no use in work on oneself, just as it is no use mixing bread with concrete. It takes certainly some time before we can begin to see for ourselves why the work mentions certain special things against which effort must be made. But if you say, I must not justify myself because the work says I should not, then you will again get nowhere, for you will not be doing anything from yourself, from your own understanding. To work from one's understanding is one of the great characteristics of the fourth way. When we see clearly through our own self-observation, that self-justifying keeps us where we are, and is a process that has this as its object, so that we may always be in the right at the expense of any change or evolution of ourselves. If at the same time our aim is to change, then we will have far greater power to stop it, for then we shall understand, and want to do so from our own understanding. We will see the good of doing this for ourselves. It is then possible to begin to make right effort. For if we are always going to be right, then we will never be in the wrong, and if we are never in the wrong, then we will never change. To feel one is always right is to block the way to all self-development. Let's now suppose that the two imaginary people allow the mechanical processes of self-justifying to go on unchecked, and that neither of them observes it at work in them, but that both are fully identified with it, fully engaged in it. In fact, fully liking and enjoying it, without a trace of insight into themselves. They will begin to construct what can be called negative systems in themselves, against one another. Once this seriously starts between two people, it is very difficult to get matters right again. They will remember only unpleasant things about one another, for when a person feels negative against another, their memory, working through association, calls up only unpleasant things which the activity of self-justifying makes eager use of. And so it will go on, just as it does in life, quite unchecked internally but checked by outer things, such as the fear of the law, the fear of libel or slander, litigation, the fear of losing one's reputation or being laughed at. In short, by the external restraints that control people and which if removed would turn them into quite other kinds of people. Suppose then that these two imaginary people have already got some inner checks and inner restraints developed in them by the work, and that each of them at a certain moment comes as it were to their senses, awakens a little and becomes more conscious, passes into work eyes, and begins to observe themselves from the feeling of the work and its influences, which are quite different from the influences of life. They notice that they are justifying themselves. They notice that they are recalling only unpleasant things of the other person and nothing pleasant, which to say the least is unfair. They think of what was said to them and what they in turn said. They search in that special memory formed in a person by conscious self-observation, for examples of themselves being unfair in the past, and find several they had noticed. Suddenly all this indignation falls away from them. They are no longer defending their false idea of themselves, their false picture of themselves. They see the truth, that they are often unfair. Now self-justifying cannot work in the presence of acknowledged truth. It is a process of lying that keeps the great central lie in us alive and well. That is, our false personality. Now suppose that these two people meet the next day. They will instantly know that each has worked on themselves, without saying a word to one another, and the whole thing is over. It is not in the past anymore. It is cancelled. They are both free. All that has been spoken of here is psychology, and psychological work on oneself from the point of view of this teaching, its psychological method with regard to the application of it to work on the self.